When I finished the Conviction arc in 2021, I was actually on the verge of calling Berserk as a series overrated. I found myself like very underwhelmed by it. I thought it was going downhill. It had problems since the beginning. It was too try hard. It was too edgy. The characters weren't interesting. The action wasn't great. It was bloated. It had a bunch of unnecessary padding. It was doing a lot of things that didn't make a whole lot of sense. And it all culminated with Conviction, a complete mess of a story arc that to this day that I still look back on like very, very, very negatively. The low point of the manga for me at this stage, and considering I'm on like volume 34 right now, and we're nearing the end, I think there's like maybe 10 more before we reach the end of like the Mura era, like, the canon Berserk, and we move on to like new Berserk of like post mortem, like, let's finish this storyline kind of thing. And I feel myself very conflicted because I was on the verge of like, really going in on Berserk, kind of talking about just how much I did not like this. And I have completely flipped the script on that going into the Falcon of the Millennium Empire, because going into this, 30 volumes in, I finally start to really feel as if Berserk is a great manga. This is, I think, some of the best material I've read, like, possibly ever. I don't want to say it's like One Piece Enies Lobby tier, because that is like one of the most base things I've ever seen in my life. Maybe not Attack on Titan tier, maybe not like the best of the best, some of my favorite things ever. But like, to say that I don't like the Falcon and the Millennium Empire like a lot, to say that I'm not like really invested in what's happening here, to say that I'm not like invested in what's going to happen in the future is an understatement. This is, I think, the arc that finally cements like Griffith as a character as being like the greatest antagonist in history, right? Because, going up to this point, I kind of talked about this, how Griffith just didn't feel like a character that really came all together all that well. Lots of cool ideas that didn't really mesh very well. You had this like, this setup, and you had the origin story. You had like, the return with Conviction. I felt all of that was kind of misplaced. I felt the character didn't really leave much of an impact on me at all, aside from like, having a similar kind of perspective of like, oh yeah, I gotta, my life is dedicated to accomplishing this dream, a concept that I find extremely relatable. I would have said Griffith was my favorite character like early on, but not necessarily for the reasons that people say I should find him compelling, right? Like I don't find him, his friendship with Guts all that interesting. Casca's dynamic with him isn't interesting. Like, I don't see him as like, the Band of the Hawk is interesting characters. Like, I had so many problems with the Golden Age, and that was such a long time ago. I really will have to go back and read it again to kind of talk about like the nitty gritty of like what works and what doesn't work. I've gone into depth about how like, characters like Wild don't need to exist, and how I feel like Casca only exists to get raped. And I do have like, lots of real criticisms about the Golden Age, but like going into the Falcon of the Millennium Empire, seeing like Mura kind of address some of these criticisms, trying to like, hype up Griffith as like a real unstoppable force, a truly godlike entity, not like this, measly peasy like JRPG god that can be like killed with the power of friendship. No, Griffith is established as being like completely unstoppable, like a true force of nature that has this entire kingdom just quaking, like this guy is legit taking on the apocalypse right now, and you just know he's going to win. It is unbelievably cool. It's unbelievably like well handled, well paced, like beautifully drawn. This is, I think, just such an interesting characteristic of Griffith in this sense, because I've heard people like describe Griffith as like an antichrist kind of character, and in this sense, it's like, is that really true? Because like the way it's portrayed in the manga is if like Griffith is doing something legitimately great, like he is legitimately, doing something good for the kingdom. He's going up against all these corrupt nobles. He's utilizing all these demons. He's fighting this apostle who's like, going out of hand and like screwing up things for everyone. Like he's legit saving probably thousands of lives, tens of thousands of lives. This entire giant city, rebuilding Midland. Like it's so good. Like it legit comes off as like, what is he doing that's wrong, right? The only thing Griffith ever did that was in any way questionable was the whole like sacrificing the Band of the Hawk thing. And if you really think about that in any meaningful capacity, like, the Band of the Hawk was sworn to die for him anyway. So there's really, they weren't his friends. He outright says this. Like, it's not that unusual, I think, for the people under you in like that kind of company, a military band, to die under these kind of circumstances, right? It's not that uncommon for like, for rapes, like it's like, I feel so like not all that sympathetic for everyone involved. It just feels like, the Band of the Hawk were like following Griffith, for their own selfish reasons, this idea that like he is going to like complete them, particularly Casca, which I think is like a really interesting aspect of her character that we really need to talk about. But like, in general, like when I look at like everything that's happened since then, like what exactly has happened, right? Since the eclipse, in that like Griffith has come back and he immediately started like, fixing all the problems, right? All the real genuine problems, not the useless namby-pamby shit that like Guts has been dicking around with. Like he hasn't been recruiting lollies into his JRPG party. He hasn't been like tagging along with a kid who doesn't know what he's doing. Like he's not like wasting his time doing nothing. Like he's actually, accomplishing real heroics. Like he's doing real stuff. He is someone who has done heinous shit in the past, but when you look past that, when you look at like what he's actually doing, what he actually wants to accomplish, how he treats those around him, how like, he's able to kind of like, how he's been like contributing to, the war effort against the Kushan, like you get someone who is undoubtedly an extremely heroic figure, right? Like what he's done in the past has like really nothing to do with what he's doing now, which is, I think, clearly the best possible thing that anyone could do. Far better than anything Guts has accomplished. Like Guts couldn't even like handle that one sorcerer guy. Like, but. Meanwhile, Griffith is going up against like, the apocalypse, super death, like emperor of Kushan. It's really interesting to seeing this play out, and I do think, in a lot of ways, a lot of like the real themes of Berserk are starting to make themselves apparent, and I think it's kind of interesting, like what they're going for here, because I don't interact with fan circles at all. I don't know what like the community thinks about this stuff. I don't know like how intellectual the Berserk community is, because from what I've seen, like a lot of people like, it's a lot like Attack on Titan was like before the ending, where people were like making up all these weird fan wanky theories about how like, Guts is meant to be the Ubermensch or some shit, like he's the Nietzschean ideal. It's stupid, right? Like I don't look at like fan theories for this kind of thing. I don't like speculate. I just read the text, because like 99% of the time the fan base is completely wrong about everything and gets hung up on like absolutely stupid shit that does not matter. And I do think like Guts's plot line in this, which I think is kind of been the thing since the eclipse happened, like this whole thing of like trying to be there for Casca and trying to be supportive. It's a really interesting character choice, and it's such an interesting decision for the character. And one of the things that makes it really interesting is that Guts is doing all this stuff for Casca, right? He's recruiting this JRPG party. He's doing this stuff where like he's making all these friends. He's like making these decisions to try and like, do stuff to try and do things for Casca, to protect her, and like, that's kind of what this is all about. It's for Casca specifically, right? Guts himself doesn't really have any real long-term goal outside of being there for Casca, because he is in love with her at this point. Like he had sex with her once and he's like completely taken with her. And That's the thing, though, is that like Guts is in love with Casca, but like Casca is 100% not in love with Guts. And like I'm not just talking about like the whole like being raped into like an infantile state thing. Like I think like in general, like Casca is not in love with Guts, right? She went to him in a moment of weakness, right? She had sex with him, but she does not love him. Like her heart has always belonged to Griffith. Much like Charlotte, she was 100% raped, but she also 100% enjoyed it. Probably, I don't know, but like the rape of Casca, by the way, has nothing to do with Casca herself, but is about like Griffith trying to spite Guts. So Casca herself does not matter. Like in that scenario, to Griffith, right? Griffith himself does not care about Casca at all. But conversely, Casca does not care about Guts. Everything, their entire relationship was entirely built around their relationship with Griffith, right? How Casca was salty about like how Griffith like saw something in Guts that wasn't in other people, right? Like he saw the person that Guts would become. He understood that Guts had like limitless potential to become the struggler, right? The most epic anime like protagonist of all time, right? The grim dark berserker himself, the black swordsman. Like Guts, like Griffith realized that like Guts had like anime protagonist syndrome going on, and immediately like became attached to this guy for that reason, because he understood that Guts, out of everyone he's ever met in his life, is the only one who had the potential to kind of have the same drive to succeed that he had. Like, the only one that Griffith could ever possibly feel close to, because this is something that like everybody in Berserk has, is that like dreams. And usually their dreams are very small, they're petty, they're inconsequential, they don't mean anything, right? They're just basically just selfish desires, right? Charlotte just wants to be with like Griffith. Casca just wants to be with Griffith. The Band of the Hawk just wants to follow Griffith, because that's the easy, simple thing to do. They don't have any higher goals. They don't have anything else they want. They don't have any real ideals or philosophy or anything, right? All they care about is just following this guy, because that's what benefits them. That is the easy way to solve their problems. And of course, like in the end, this is going to like lead in disaster for all of them, right? Griffith is in some way going to fuck all of these people over, and they absolutely deserve it by putting all of their faith and hope and like dreams on this like one individual that has no reason to really care about them or like respect them at all. And it's all just going to come crumbling down eventually. But like the answer, like when exactly is it going to happen? How is that going to happen? Like for a lot of these characters, it doesn't really matter. It's probably not going to be addressed ever, but like that's kind of my thoughts on it, right? Is that like, everyone who's following Griffith is doomed to get fucked over in some way, shape, or form at some point. And they don't care, because in the moment, it feels good. In the moment, it feels exciting. In the moment, it feels like, they're following someone great. But like, again, it's just going to like backstab them or whatever. So like, how does this relate to like the overarching theme of Berserk, or like the theme as I understand it? Well, my thing is, Casca does not love Guts, right? He's doing all of this stuff for her, right? And I think, the moment she gets her memory back, the moment it happens, like, that's going to become apparent, is that, like, she doesn't care about Guts at all. He thinks way too highly of his time with the Band of the Hawk, because that's the thing I've noticed when like reading Falcon and the Millennium Empire. Thinking back to the Golden Age, my problems with it, how the narrative progressed, how shallow the characters actually are. If you look at like the characters in Falcon and the Millennium Empire, the JRPG party, Serpico, Isidro, Shirk, Farnese, like all of them have like way more dynamic, interesting character arcs, personalities, backgrounds, and like aspirations than like anybody in the Band of the Hawk. They're all much better people than anyone involved like with Griffith or like, that part of the world. They all have their own dreams, essentially. And by extension, that means that like they're much more well-rounded people. And in a lot of ways, in spite of Guts' trauma, in spite of like everything that's happened this far, like these people are actually better friends to him than anyone in the Band of the Hawk. But because of what happened, because of Guts' feelings on it, because of like Griffith and like all of that stuff, like Guts isn't willing to admit it to himself. That, Casca does not love him, but like Farnese might, Shirk might when she gets old enough, there just is an actual relationship there, with these people. There's an actual like mutual respect. There's an actual like healthy dynamic between these characters, right? There's an actual thing there that was never there with Griffith, Guts, or the rest of the Band of the Hawk. Like Guts actually belongs with these people more than he ever belonged with the Band of the Hawk, right? This is his own group that he established himself, like completely organically, and he is like doing the exact same kind of thing that Griffith does. And like in a lot of ways, it seems like Guts is kind of going to be like the antithesis to Griffith, in which like he is, playing the holy savior when he's really not. While Guts is like the angry black swordsman, the berserker who does all this like terrible stuff, allegedly, and yet like in the end is somehow a much better person and a much better, like more realized individual with a much more like, actual friends, right? An actual community, like an actual thing to be proud of, right? Like, an actual, you have people that actually care about you. And like Griffith really doesn't in that sense. All of his relationships are built on this idea that like he's just this divine figure, and it's just not. It's just kind of fake to a certain extent. It's not real. Like it's propped up. Like so many people don't know about what the kind of person he is. He doesn't really show that side of him to anyone other than Guts, right? Or maybe Charlotte. Like Charlotte's gotten like the worst of it, I think. I would say she's probably the closest person to him. Honestly, Sonya's like that, the kind of person that thinks she knows it. Well, okay. They're all like that, honestly. Like they're all like that. They all think they know who Griffith is, but don't really understand him. Like, they don't even come close to understanding him in this sense. In spite of thinking they do, both Charlotte and Sonya is like that. But Charlotte's sleeping with him for for political reasons. So I guess, like in a certain respect, like I would say, they understand certain different aspects of his character. Sonya understands like the demon aspect and like how Griffith is different than other people, and like Charlotte just sees like the White Hawk, the hero of Midland and stuff like that, and will do anything to preserve that image of him, right? Like she cares about Griffith a lot, right? But it's not like she doesn't know him, right? Like she doesn't know Griffith. Like she has this idea of who he is, but she doesn't really know. And, when you compare that to like what Guts is doing, where like these people are like, being exposed to all kinds of, all sorts of sides of him, the berserker half, like the normal half, like, like his rage, like, they're more able to like interact with him in different contexts. Like they're more able to treat him like an actual person. And with Griffith, that just doesn't happen. Like people love Griffith because he is just the easy solution to all of their problems and nothing more.